Let's keep this going. On July 16th, Marco Rubio and Stephen Miller spoke at the Ministerial on the Resurgence of Political Terrorism. I know you've probably never heard of that. It's a conference that was convened by the State Department, by our State Department, and hosted in Washington, D.C. Now, the point of their speeches was to lecture European counterterrorism officials that these Europeans, had developed a blind spot which doesn't allow them to see the real terrorists, that the real terrorists are people on the left who oppose mass immigration and who oppose, exploitation by big business and big capital and big capitalism. And they used some language that went largely unnoticed, but I think you should notice it. Take a listen.
We're assembled. To be blunt, not one of the people that is demonstrating looks like a normal person. Not one looks normal. They're all deformed in some way, in their appearance, in their dress, in their mannerism. Why is that? Why? If you look at two photographs and you see a normal American street, you see an Antifa protest. Why do the people that are violently demonstrating, why is there not one normal-looking person among them? Every one of them, through the course of their life and their decisions, has scarred their body and their appearance in many different ways, to the point in which their outer appearance becomes a manifestation of their inner hatred. Trust your instincts. To all people and across all civilizations, you know what normal is. You know what beautiful is. You know what good is. You know that families are right. President Trump issued a directive in our parlance. It's called a National Security Presidential Memorandum, or NSPM, NSPM 7 to be exact, that directs, for the first time in American history, all of our law enforcement and intelligence agencies to work together to disrupt, identify, defund, debank, arrest, and prosecute these political terrorists that are operating in our country.
This is what radical leftism is. It may wear various different slogans and ideologies across place and time. They can call themselves anti-capitalist or anti-imperialist or communist or anarchist or Marxist, but the fundamental character is always the same. It's always the same. It is a poisonous resentment cloaked in the language of equality and justice and liberation, an overwhelming need to tear down what greater men have built, to wreck what is beautiful and what is right on behalf of people who are only filled with ugliness and have nothing else to offer the world. Through violence and through terror, they once again seek to impose their ugliness on all of us. The old dogma was wrong. The old dogma was wrong. None of this is driven by idealism. It is not utopian. In fact, it is the opposite. One of the criticisms you sometimes hear of communism, for example, is that it sounds good in theory, but it never works in practice. That's actually not true. Communism does not sound good in theory. The world it envisions for all of us is small, flat, gray, leveled of all exception, drained of all that is good and noble in the human soul. The world it envisions is a world without courage, a world without creativity or ambition, a world without heroes or glory or great causes to strive towards, a world without miracles, without myths, without men who rise above the rest to do incredible and extraordinary things. And the world communism envisions is a world without God.
And it would probably sound better in the original German. Joining me now is our friend, Dr. Robert P. Jones, Robbie Jones to us, who is our partner. He's the founder and he is the chief demographer at the Public Religion Research Institute and our partner in this series, which we call Countering White Christian Nationalism. And Robbie, good to see you. I will note that there is a doctor named Dr. Robert B. Shipner. He's a clinical professor of medicine in pulmonary and critical care at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. And he wrote a whole piece about these speeches, which really went unnoticed by much of the media. I'm just going to read you the last bit of it. He says, I've been practicing medicine for decades. Cancer is my vocabulary, not, he meant Stephen Miller's. And I know what happened the last time a government borrowed it. The Nazis' state central perversion was the medicalization of killing, the enemy as tumor, as bacillus, the nation as patient, extermination as cure. Robert J. Lifton called it the biomedical vision. It recruited my profession first, and my profession answered willingly. When a government describes citizens as a cancer, it has written the first line of a treatment plan. On Thursday, the plan was read aloud from a State Department podium in 6 verbs. I mean, this was Stephen Miller saying that any of the pleas of leftist protesters that their rights are being violated should fall on deaf ears. He called them ugly, physically ugly and deformed, saying their inner manifestation is outward in ugliness. And he's physically hideous looking. So it's wild that he said that. But didn't those speeches to you sound like, decaf Nazism?
Well, yeah, your original statement about, sounded better in the original German, I think was not far off the mark. So Joy, as we've got a new book coming out called Backslide. And I begin exactly here at this point, where I began with National Security Presidential Memo number 7, which Rubio and Miller both cite, and which, by the way, will be what they use to come after you and me eventually. Here, that it is about kind of declaring people who disagree with the administration domestic terrorists, right? But here, I think any scholar of early 20th century history, hair will be standing on end when they hear this speech, because this is exactly the language. It is. I mean, it's not like Nazi language. It is Nazi language. It is straight out of Mein Kampf. Hitler did this over and over. Himmler did this over and over, this argument that you can look at someone and you can tell by their physical appearance whether or not they're morally upright, right? And that people who are not morally upright and have made terrible choices, I mean, Miller actually spells this out, right? Their choices of envy create an outward ugliness, and then you can just trust your instincts by looking at someone. So this is the same argument that was used in caricatures, and you look at like early 1930s German cartoons of kind of Jews with like exaggerated, distorted features. This was all about this kind of pseudoscience there that kind of said that, oh yeah, this immoral or inner disfigurement manifests itself in physical traits. It's all about racial hierarchy. Here, you saw this in other places as well. So that kind of a Western European or Nordic masculine features are the thing that are normal, and anything about that is not only about just difference, but it's about inferiority and, in fact, moral disfigurement and closer proximity to evil and threat. So that's what is being spelled out here by the special assistant to the president, by her secretary of state. It is straight up Nazi language.
And I mean, of course, the Nazis in Germany borrowed their tactics from Jim Crow. They were inspired by the Klan and by the right-wing American treatment of Black folks. And they also, in the right, in the U.S., even when they were called Democrats, they would do caricatures of Black people, of Black features being a symbol of moral depravity, and use, thick lips and big hips being a symbol of depravity. So you had the
posture. Yes,
exactly. And they did the same thing with Mexicans. They would use these pictures. They did it to take Hawaii. They showed the Queen of Hawaii as this hideous, monstrous looking figure to basically soften people up and say, we can hurt these people because look how ugly they are. And it's interesting that Stephen Miller, who again is quite ugly, keeps talking about beauty. And I don't know if he wrote Rubio's speech, but they keep emphasizing beauty. And then you see what MAGA does. They make all their women get the same makeover. So they have the same sort of vapid look to them, right? They all have to look the same with the big hair, and they have to have, exaggerated breasts, exaggerated lip. Like they're trying to look like a certain thing, or this look maxing on the right among men who try to all break their bones in their face to look a specific Nordic way. It feels like they're just reproducing Nazi Germany inside the Republican Party. It's hard to dispute what Don Lemon said, that MAGA is the closest thing that we have in the modern day to Nazism. It's crazy.
Yeah, what's wild about it is that you think, okay, yes, you say that, and you even check yourself, right? Of saying, like, am I insane that I'm saying this now about our own country and about one of our two storied, long-lasting political parties, that this is where one of our two major, not some fringe party, right, on the far, far right, but like one of our two major political parties has now been taken over by this movement, by this MAGA movement. I'm an academic. I'm trained to not be shrill, to not be overreactive, to kind of be cautious in the claims that you're making. And I have spent a long time thinking about this. And, in the first chapter of the book, I basically lay it out and say, look, despite all of that, the clear evidence in front of us, I just say, this is our 1933. And that was a moment right? Of kind of, and what's wild is that in the speech, Miller mentions that we're not too far from the point of no return, and I think a lot of that language they're using actually is just flipping things on its head, right? That I think, in fact, what we're facing is the exact flip side of that. That we're not too far from the point of no return into being completely slipping into fascism, and not only fascism, but in a way that has, as long as we let this kind of thinking become normalized, every time we do it, we blunt our moral capacity, right? Every time we let it speak. So I'm so happy if you not let this speech go by. It's absolutely critical. This is one historians will be bringing up 10, 20, 50 years from now as a kind of milestone or a brick in the road, right, on our way to authoritarianism if we don't really stand up and say, oh, no, 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 no. That is not the country we want to live in. And for those of us who are Christian, also saying that is not a vision. They talk about the Bible and Christianity all the time. That is not the true, the good, and the beautiful that Christian theologians talk about. I mean, this is actually a manifestation of evil.
Yeah. And by the way, the Nazis also purported themselves to be Christians, as did the Klan. Let's talk about the data, because the thing is that this ideology really is seated, as you just mentioned, in one political party, right? The Democrats used to be the bad guys. They were the conservatives, but conservatism jumped the fence into the Republican Party. And by the way, this same sort of claque of extremists used to caricature Lincoln as a hideous monster and imply he was a Negro because they emphasized that his sort of proclivities against slavery meant that he was distorted and physically ugly. But anyway, moving on, it is Republicans where this doesn't live in both parties. So you've got some data here. Let's put up F3, Jason, if you could. And it manifests itself in an absolute obsession with mass deportation. It's the main thing they care about. They care about it more than they ever cared about the Epstein files. We must remove brown people. Talk about the data you have on Republican support for ICE, and does it differ from other people?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things I keep saying over and over, and it is really important to remember that we are not living in a 50-50 divided country. We are living in a party where a extreme minority has taken over one of our two political parties, and you can really see this in this data. I mean, social scientists call this asymmetric polarization. Yes, we're polarized, but we're not evenly polarized. So one of the reasons why I put this chart the way I did is I wanted to see just how far from the mainstream Republicans have become and this is just about ICE. You could do this actually on any number of issues around immigration, around abortion, and you get these same kinds of gaps. But here it is quite remarkable. So just on this question of whether the surge of ICE officers are making our communities less safe, the number of people who disagree with that, it's 75% of Republicans. But if you look at all other Americans, that's independents, Democrats, people of no party at all, it's only 23% of the country that disagrees with that statement. And it's just down the board. It's basically 7 in 10 or more of Republicans, no matter what you ask them about ICE. Increase their funding? Yep. Should they be able to conceal their identity? Yes. Have a favorable view of them? Yes. Even after all the killings, all the murders, right, in the streets by ICE, we're seeing this kind of thing. And in every case, it is no more than a quarter of Americans who agree with Republicans on any of these issues. And I think that's really important to remember, is that the moral core, I think, of the country is still actually intact here. But it is just having trouble finding its voice and actually finding its way to kind of push back.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I didn't use it, but the latest polling showing Donald Trump's approval rating stuck at around 30%. Yeah. You can go all the way back to when he was in office he holds a third of the country, and you can now see why, because you average out Republicans with everyone else, you wind up with about a third. So his 33% is literally because he's holding a lock. He's got this lock on about a third of the country. Even more so on Christian nationalists. This is F4, James, you can put up that slide. So then when you isolate people who are white Christian nationalists, it's even more extreme.
Yeah, well, I want to take a look at this, say, well, parties are political entities, but they're driven by ideology, right? And so what's underneath this? What's really driving it? And so without dealing with party at all, I kind of want to do the same exercise. So what happens if you look at white Americans who support Christian nationalism here? And basically you see a very similar pattern. It's, again, 3/4 all the way up and down the line. No matter what you ask them about ICE, they're all in for ICE. And these are white Americans who support Christian nationalism. But if you look at, and even among white Americans, right? So this is not just a white thing. Even if you look at white Americans who do not support them, it's down only about 3 in 10. If you look at all other Americans, again, it's only about 3 in 10 here who support it. So again, white Christian nationalists, Republicans are just far from the middle of the country, and but are dragging the country's legal apparatus that direction, even while the kind of moral sensibilities of the country are nowhere near supporting that.
And then now there's the scary one, because since we're talking about Nazism and the parallels to Nazism, support for internment camps, basically to create concentration camps. Talk about this data.
Look, I think one of the challenges of our moment is that there's so much coming at us at once, all of it bad, that people, and I have this problem too. Like, okay, this is just the next moral outrage, but is it something significant? Is it not so significant? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, whatever else is going on, we can safely say that building concentration camps on U.S. soil is a bright line we ought to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've been asking this question here about whether people agree or disagree that the federal government should detain immigrants who are in the country illegally and internment camps until they can be deported. And what we see here is, again, look at this: Republicans and white Christian nationalists, adherents and sympathizers, way out there, right? 3/4 on both of these questions. All other Americans in a very, very different place. And again, if you look even at white Americans who don't support Christian nationalism, it's down only around 3 in 10 who support this. So it's not a white racial thing, but it is that combination of, and by the way, just to say this, the reason why these numbers look very similar is because the Republican Party today is 70% white and Christian.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you draw the Venn diagram, there of kind of Republicans and white Christians, there's only a little sliver outside of that, of those two overlapping circles. That's why this looks so similar. But this is the ideology. And that's why you hear in both of those speeches, Miller talking about the Bible, people going to church. I mean, it is this vision. It is this literal white picket fence, white Christian vision of quote unquote normal. Right. And holding that up in some way. But this is the vision, right? It is an ethno-religious state where people who do not believe like them or look like them, right, have no place.
And part of the kind of mania that has produced is this really kind of insane belief that these illegal immigrants that live in their nightmares day and night are stealing elections from them, stealing power from them, even as they control the whole government, right? They control the whole government, and they still think that it's all being stolen from them, that every time they turn around, and I won't play the clip because it's too long, but, Congressman Massey pointed this out, and he said, this isn't possible, guys. We have the Supreme Court, the House, the Senate, and the White House. How can you say elections are being, Jason, let's play it real quick. We're going over time just a tiny bit, but let me just play it. This is Massey, and then, Warnock in Georgia.
I mean, just look at this just from a basic common sense perspective. The year that I won, and by the way, I won 2 elections in Georgia. I won in 21 and in 22. Our congressional delegation is majority Republican. So are you saying that on the same ballots that elected my Republican colleagues, their ballots are legitimate, and the ballots that elected John Ossoff and myself are illegitimate? It defies common sense. And I just am thinking tonight about people all across my state who are genuinely struggling, whose healthcare premiums have been doubled, who have been kicked off of healthcare. The rural hospitals I visit in rural districts that are struggling and barely hanging on, farmers who are struggling. And the President of the United States is not focused on them. He's focused, as he always is, on himself.
But I think it's a distraction from our real problems. I think it's ironic that we control the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the White House, and we're yelling election fraud. I mean, we won all the damn elections.
That kind of logic you'd think would say people go, oh, you're right. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. If it was election fraud, how did my state representative win? But they don't. I mean, is there anything in your research that shows why this cognitive dissonance
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I think this is one of the things that authoritarians do is that the very idea of cognitive dissonance ceases to exist, right? Because they train people actually to simultaneously hold all kinds of untruths together in their head. I mean, it is part of the kind of moral deconstruction of the public, of kind of demanding. So when you demand, for example, that every person that goes up for an appointment in this administration has to affirm that the 2020 election was stolen. I mean, it's not only a kind of mark of fealty, but it is a way of kind of breaking the public's moral sentiments, right? And over again. My favorite stat actually of this is that when we asked Republicans whether the 2020 election was stolen from Trump, we have 2/3 of them saying yes, still today, after 60 court cases that they lost. But when we asked them about whether the next election that he won, 2024, was conducted in a free and fair fashion, 2/3 of them say yes, absolutely. Right. So, and this is in the same survey, we get these questions. Right. So I think that is part of, but it is part of what authoritarians do. They actually try to break these strands of chains of logic so that they can kind of act with impunity.
What's so crazy about their belief system is that Donald Trump's 2 electoral victories took place when the people running the federal side of elections were Democrats. Democratic presidents were in charge of the deep state. And the one he lost is when his administration was in charge. He lost the one where his own administration was in charge of the federal apparatus. Make it make sense. The book, put the book back up. It's called Backslide, Reclaiming Faith and a Nation After the Christian Turn Against Democracy. It seems, y'all, like you're going to have to read this as a survival technique. And also just because Robbie is just so brilliant. Thank you, Robbie Jones. I appreciate you, man.
Thanks, Joy. You too.
Weekend. Thank you very much. Well, there you have it. They are the closest thing to the Nazi party. I know they're going to get mad at Fox. They're going to get pissed off, but it's true. Name anything about them that's different. Emphasizing beauty and, in this sort of, this idea that they want this aesthetic that looks like ancient Rome, embracing the camp of the saints insanity that hordes of brown people are going to take over Europe and the United States, this obsession with Muslims, it's Islamophobia that Muslims are going to create Sharia law. Like all of the things they're doing really kind of add up to only one thing, and that is 1930s Germany and also much of 1930s United States. Let's not forget, a lot of Americans were very much on the side of the Nazis in Germany and wanted to do here, continue doing here to Jewish people what they had already been doing to blacks, which inspired the Nazis in the first place. There you go.
Back to the basics, grassroots level. Let me dig a little deeper with the shovel. Plenty can't tell the forest from the trees, and I'm hard to detect, like a black hole in the dark. Injustice anywhere, it's a threat to justice everywhere. Let me make this clear, I got a bone to pick, and I'll never fear the threat of poverty. They don't want to talk about it, they rather party, so I'm a real talk about it, for sure.